The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Strict lockdowns have the province's biggest urban area moving in slow motion. Is it fair? Is it starting to hurt the rest of the province? We'll explore that tonight. Then our Ontario Hubs takes a look at getting out into the great outdoors mindfully. And from fostering a more equitable economic recovery to debates over pipelines, we've got the Agenda's Week in Review. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. It's Friday, February 26th, and that's next on the agenda. Most of the Greater Toronto Area is still in lockdown, but for essential workers and businesses that supply goods via the GTA to the whole province, they're as busy as ever. And that's while most other businesses are barely hanging on. With us to consider what happens when the city is in such an extended lockdown, from the provincial capital, Jan De Silva, Chief Executive Officer of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, and Joe Cressy, Toronto City Councillor and Chair of the city's Board of Health. Hello to you both. Thank you so much for being with us. So earlier this week, I think a lot of people got the bad news. The city canceled summer events and festivals, and I think a lot of people have been looking forward to the summer as, you know, as the end times of this COVID era. What does this mean for the city's economic outlook? Jan, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, it's not good news, but it's necessary, because at the moment it's all about safety first and getting our arms around this. But to put into context the impact, it's not only our local residents that participate in these summer festivals. We historically had a lot of tourism coming in. In 2019, more than 28 million tourists came through Toronto, many of them in the summertime. So the ramifications of this are severe from an economic perspective. But again, the health imperative is front and center. We've got to get through this and get through this on a sustainable basis.
Before we started taping, Councillor Cressy, we were talking about a year ago, we thought this would be maybe a sprint, but it turned out to be a marathon. What does it mean for the city's economic outlook for events in the summer to be canceled?
Well, I think it's hard to separate Toronto from the rest of the province and the rest of the country. I mean, we are entering, hopefully, the final days of this pandemic, but one that's been deeply destabilizing and economically brutal. And I think it's often been set out that that somehow this is either a public health response to keep people healthy or an economic response to keep businesses open. But in fact, it's not an either or. What we've in fact seen around the world is that a stronger public health response by driving COVID cases down to near zero actually leads to a faster and stronger economic recovery. So the harder we hit this pandemic to drive cases down, the faster we'll be able to reopen and get the economy going again. And so this isn't about public health or the economy. In fact, a good public health response ultimately helps the economy.
So Toronto is in lockdown until March, and the Chief Medical Officer, Eileen Davila, and Peel's Medical Officer, Lawrence Lowe, had to write a letter to the province to ask them to extend our lockdown. And I want to read you an excerpt from that letter. It reads, in part, "We recognize the importance of balancing economic recovery with protecting the health of the population. However, it is important to recognize the weariness the public is experiencing, particularly those who have been most impacted by COVID-19. We believe that the public will be far less accepting of a return to a third lockdown than the gradual and progressive lifting of the existing one." Jen, what do you think lockdowns are the best answer?
Look, it's a difficult question. I would say our point of view is, number one, we've got to get this under control. The concern that I would raise is, a year into this, we still don't have enough tools available to public health to get their arms around this fully. If we look at other jurisdictions, New Zealand, for instance, they've got much more robust tracking and tracing. We're still heavily reliant on a low-touch method like mailing letters and trying to make phone calls, as opposed to using QR codes and other types of Bluetooth technology to make it easier to quickly identify, isolate, and prevent the transmission. So what I would have to say is, as I've said, I think we need to be equipping public health with better tools to deal with this. The duration's just going on too long, and I think low-tech approaches are going to make it difficult to really fully control this.
Can you give us some examples of those tools?
No, example I would use is New Zealand's COVID Tracer app.
Right.
It uses Bluetooth technology, so any individual who's going in anywhere, restaurant, bank, anywhere, they tap their phone with a QR code. They also have Bluetooth enabling, which is anonymizingly tracking family and friends that they're in touch with. If they test positive for COVID, all of this data that's been collected is shared with public health, and they can quickly reach out electronically to any institution they've been in or any person they've been in touch with to say, you need to warn your clients and get some testing done. And it's enabling them to move much more quickly to get people into isolation so that transmission is not spreading.
I have my COVID app as well, and the thing about living in the GTA is that we do have a lot of people that live in Toronto, but maybe they work in Peel region. And Councillor Cressy, you can also go shopping. You can leave Toronto and go to Mississauga. If things don't get better, should we consider pivoting to reopening with physical distancing, masks as part of the condition?
So, Nam, let me I would actually take a step back, and I think have a really honest conversation here about Ontario and Canada's approach and contrast that with New Zealand that Jan just mentioned, or even Atlantic Canada. What is the strategy here? Is the strategy to target nearly zero cases so that we can, with test, trace, and isolate systems, keep cases near zero and reopen? That's the New Zealand model. Which has allowed New Zealand to have an economic recovery that looks like a V. It dropped down and it's gone right back up because they got cases down near zero. That's the Atlantic Canada model. In fact, the decline in GDP is significantly less in Atlantic Canada versus the rest of the country, precisely because at a strategic level, they targeted zero cases and thus put in place the infrastructure to do that. Travel restrictions, strong lockdowns, and sustained strong lockdowns when necessary. It wasn't that there was you cannot test and trace your way to beat COVID-19 when you're having 300, 400, 500, 600 cases a day. The only way you target zero cases is with a strong coordinated approach. And so to be honest, what we're seeing right now is Toronto and Peel implement stronger measures, but weaker measures throughout the rest of the province. And to your point, well, people live in York and work in Toronto, and people live in Toronto and will be traveling to York to go to restaurants. And so we're actually, the truth of the matter is, we're not going to beat COVID right now. We're on a path towards a third wave, and this is bad for the economy. If you want to help the economy, you drive cases down zero with a clear approach, and then you get the economy open, not this endless series of waves, which is the lack of strategic path we've had for nearly a year now.
So if we're having an honest conversation, I'm glad you said that. Since the pandemic started, we've been hearing that there is no wealth without health. But some people could argue that we can't have people with good health without wealth. Don't you agree, Jan?
Well, I think you're talking about those that have been badly impacted by the outbreak. I mean, there are a number of people in hospitality and tourism that have basically lost their jobs and are on hold. That's, I think what we need to do is look at the complete picture. It's not about saying we need to reopen simply to create jobs. It's about saying, as the councillor said, how do we get this to a point where we can control it so we can more safely and sustainably reopening things? But without a doubt, that is the crux of things. It's not just the health pandemic. It's very much the impact that this has had to so many jobs that have been lost as a result of the outbreak. Councillor
Cressy, I'd like to ask you the same question.
Yeah, when we talk about lockdowns, there are real consequences. And so the intended consequences of a lockdown is to reduce contact between people and thus reduce virus spread. The unintended consequence that we have to acknowledge is that when you close businesses, employees and employers suffer deeply. And so a policy response here has to address both. The intended consequences to drive COVID down, but also with financial relief to support those hard hit. And so it's interesting, when we look at the data from the first lockdown in the spring, one of the things we saw is that 30% of racialized Torontonians in Toronto said that they had a significant decrease in household income, whereas only 19% of non-racialized Torontonians reported that. And so I say that because everybody's getting hit. Everybody's being hard hit, but those who are already struggling are being hard hit even worse. And so a true policy response to beat COVID and protect people doesn't involve reopening the minute you think you can so that businesses can get a bit of income in and then having to close again. Rather, it's close business and provide financial relief to allow them to continue living and paying their rent and buying groceries. And we've never quite cracked the code. We kept trying to reopen, close, when what we need is an actual comprehensive approach to beat the virus and sustain and financially provide support to those employers and employees throughout.
We have seen. Go ahead, Jen. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that, let me just provide some data just to anchor this as well. The financial district, pre-COVID, we had 418,000 daytime employees working in the financial district, 1,200 small businesses in the path and in that downtown core that relied on that daytime customer. Prior to the most recent lockdowns, only 5% of that workforce had returned. And for those 1,200 small businesses who have on average 10 employees each, it has been devastating. And so absolutely we need to get our hands around the pandemic. But the challenge for many of those small business owners is, yes, there's been programs like the emergency benefit account, but it's causing them to go heavily into debt. And so we've had small businesses that are closing, others that are saying if we have repeat waves, they just can't keep hanging on. So I agree with what the councillor's saying. We've got to get this to a point where we can control it so that we don't have to go into repeat lockdowns. But the flip side of this is even the stimulus that's on offer just isn't going to keep enough of them hanging on. They're just getting too much into debt just simply to keep the lights on. This is not debt to buy equipment or inventory or to expand. It's simply keeping their lights on or keeping their rental facility in place so that they can reopen when they can.
Not to discount what you're saying, there's a lot of small business owners who have really suffered in this, but a lot of big big retail places have even made more money during the pandemic, and they've been open this whole time. And some people are saying that is an unfair advantage. I'll give you an example. I won't say the name of the store, but there's a store by my house. They sell candy, but because they have a fridge with milk and juice, they're open. Is it finally time to address that in order to save more businesses from disappearing? Jan?
Well, this is where I think the ability to give public health better data to understand what is triggering a lockdown would help deal with this. I understand the frustration for some of these smaller retailers who are saying this big box retailer can remain open and we're not concerned about cases there, yet I can't. I think there'd be a level of comfort for people about the situation we put many of these small businesses in if there was better data that just simply said, yes, closing you down is really important because. But right now, I think many of these small retailers believe that they're at a disadvantage and they're not quite sure why it's okay for a larger big box to be open and not for them. I don't draw any conclusions from that. I simply say I really wish we had better data so that we could point to the decisions that we're making to give these business owners who are desperate to get back on their feet a better understanding of why we're taking the actions we are. And I say that, hand on heart, saying we absolutely have to get this pandemic under control on a sustainable basis. So it's not saying these steps we've taken aren't correct. I'm just saying at this point in the pandemic, better data, better insights around where the outbreak is being triggered, I think would calm some of this distress that's happening in the small business community.
Well, Councillor Cressy, I want to ask you that same question. What do you say to people who have businesses and they say this is an unfair advantage for the big retail box office stores? I want to say box office because I really want to go to the movies.
I mean, I would say, frankly, that those small business owners who are closed, meanwhile, they look at big box stores that are selling essential items like groceries, but also selling books and DVDs and toys, that's not fair. And here's what it speaks to. We are coming into a potential third wave, and we have never treated a lockdown seriously. Because what is an essential business? If you're truly going to drive cases down to near zero, we currently have a list of nearly 36 non-essential businesses that are open. And that leads to a lack of retail fairness. So let's take a step back. In the first wave last spring, I think all levels of government were this is a brand new pandemic, a new virus. We were trying to figure out what's going on. In the second wave leading up to it, there was a hope that we could maintain a level of reopening while keeping case counts down. Well, and that proved not to work. And here we're approaching a potential third wave, and we're doing the same thing we did in the fall, which is we're allowing far, far too many operations that aren't essential to be open. And what's going to happen is it's likely going to trigger a third wave. That's what's going to happen. And I think the fact here is if we're going to beat a third wave, we need to treat this lockdown seriously. We need to treat it consistently across the province, and we need to provide that financial relief that's necessary for those employees and employers who are affected. Otherwise, we're about to repeat the second wave all over again.
When you say to treat it consistently across the province, what would that look like to you?
Well, I mean, to put it frankly, I mean, currently you have Peel and Toronto that are locked down, and then you have Durham, Halton, and York that are not. Meanwhile, the case rates are not radically different in those regions. And so that means that cases will go up. If you want to beat COVID, if you want to get it down to near zero levels, you need a clear strategy and a consistent approach. And what we have right now is we have a strategy to see another wave. And that's what's going to happen. And then we're going to have to lock down in other areas all over again, like we're seeing about to happen in Thunder Bay, for example. And this is fundamentally because we keep trying to do the same things over again and expecting a different result. If you want to beat COVID before vaccines are here, you treat it like Atlantic Canada, New Zealand, or Australia did. Instead, in Ontario, we're doing the same thing we did in the fall, which is the same thing we did last spring.
Well, Jen, I don't have to tell you this. Toronto is a huge economic engine. What's at risk for the province and the country with an extended shutdown?
Well, you know, there's so many ways we could answer that, but let me just simply point to the fact that the example I used about the downtown core and the small businesses that aren't able to hang on, all of the supply chain that supplies them from other parts of the province are going to be feeling a reduction in customer activity because those small businesses simply aren't able to continue, aren't ordering, aren't keeping things up and running. The other way of looking at this is we've got to find a way of getting through this to the other side because it's not just getting the return of our regular local customers, it's also getting to a point in the future where we can start to unlock tourism. Many parts of the province rely on summer tourism for big parts of their economy. And so I very much agree with what the councillor's saying. We've got to get this under control because it's not just supply chains, it's the movement of people across the province that also anchors many of our economies. In Toronto, again, 28 million visitors came in 2019, and many of those visitors didn't just stay in Toronto. They were in Niagara, they were in Sudbury, North Bay, other parts of the province. And so our ability to get this under control and make sure that we've got movement of people safely within the province, that's really important for every economy and every city and town that we have across the province.
Councillor, Jan mentioned tourism and tourism, culture, and the arts. It attracts people to Toronto, big concerts, events. Will people perceive Toronto as a more unsafe place than other cities out of lockdown?
No, I don't think so, Nam. I mean, I think we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and every city, every region, every country around the world is dealing with this. And so I don't think that a big city like Toronto will be stigmatized going forward in the future any more than a city like New Zealand or Melbourne or Sydney. Like a city like New York or Melbourne or Sydney will be. Listen, I think fundamentally what's going to happen here is we are going to beat this pandemic. There's no question about that. The vaccines are finally starting to roll out, and by the fall, we will, hopefully, have achieved a level of herd immunity through vaccination. And I think we will come as a city and a region roaring back because our economic foundation is strong. People want to be in Toronto. They wanted to be in Toronto before the pandemic, and they'll want to be in Toronto afterwards. And when Toronto's doing well, the region's doing well, and the province and the country's doing well. And so I believe we will come roaring back. The question is, how do we manage from now until then? And do we have to go through another cycle of lockdowns because of an inadequate approach right now? That's the question. But we will come roaring back.
We have about 5 minutes, and I want to get in some more questions. Jan, we saw Belmont Meats close temporarily due to an outbreak, and they're a supplier to province-wide grocery stores. With so much manufacturing and businesses headquartered in Toronto, are there vital supply chains that are being disrupted right now?
Look, I'm really happy to tackle this in a couple of ways. Number one, we've been working with a couple of different business districts in Toronto. One is around the airport employment zone, where you've got a lot of logistics and manufacturing happening there. So I'd like to use them as an example. Some of those facilities, they are essential services. They have been having to put protocols and mitigations in place in their facilities to prevent or to deal with outbreaks that have been happening. So we've been looking very carefully and working very closely with them on what are the things that are working and how do we share this information across other business districts in the Toronto region. So with the Belmont Meats example, yes, that's very, very unfortunate, but I think we can take some lessons about what others have done in around the airport manufacturing zone that has helped them keep outbreaks under control or be more proactive. They're doing rapid testing daily for workers coming in. They've got robust contact tracing within their facilities. We're looking at the hygiene mitigations that they're using. So all of those things we're trying to do to say, how do we learn from those that are applying best practices that are working and share it more broadly? The other big group that we've got underway is we're working with the mayor in the financial district downtown. I spoke about those daytime employees that aren't yet back. We've just done some nanos polling. 64% of those daytime workers want to get back to work, are looking forward to returning to the office. It's the home fatigue, it's the Zoom fatigue. So we're working with business owners, with the large employers, and with public health to say, what are the mitigations we need to put in place once we're through this, as the councillor says, and once we're at a point where we can start to think about return to office, to make sure we've got all the mitigations in place that make it safe for people to return and give us an environment so that we're not triggering another outbreak, that we're able to contain this. Things like staggered work hours and looking at how that we're managing public transit mobility for those workers.
Councillor, I think a lot of people are dreading the thought of having a third lockdown, and we would like to leave the conversation with reasons to feel optimistic. After a year of this pandemic, what gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope is that the knowledge that we're going to beat this pandemic, but more than that, the opportunity to actually build a better city afterwards. In so many ways, this pandemic has exposed issues that existed long before. The housing crisis in our city, the fact that this COVID is disproportionately affecting low-income frontline workers who don't have access to decent wages and decent benefits. And so to me, what gives me hope is not that we're going to beat a pandemic. That's, returning to normal doesn't give me hope. Building a new and better normal and the opportunity to do that, to learn from COVID, to address the cracks that existed before, and to finally build a level of health equity in this city that we can be really proud of. That's what gives me hope. And frankly, that's what I think all levels of government should be striving to achieve.
And Jan, you've got 30 seconds. The same question, please.
Yes, same thing. It's that we've got all hands on deck. It's the groups that are working together now to say, how do we work with public health to support safe reopening? We are getting ready to reopen at some point in the future. And I think with the building owners, with employers all working together to harmonize the right solutions, look at international best practices, when it's okay for us to do so, we're going to be ready. And that's something to give us all hope.
Well, Jan and Councillor, thank you so much for your time. We didn't even make it through all of our questions, but we do really appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nat.
during the extended lockdowns and closures caused by COVID-19, getting out into nature has been one bright spot for many, but it's far less clear that it's been so great for the natural world. Mary Baxter covers the southwestern part of the province for Ontario Hubs. She joins us now from London with that story. Welcome.
Hi, Jayanne.
Now, Mary, a lot of advice from public health officials has been to get outside, not just for your physical health, but for your mental health. Do we have an idea of how many people have taken that advice and visited, say, parks and conservation areas?
Well, most of the organizations that I've talked to are mentioning that they're seeing just a huge increase in the number of people who are visiting. So, for instance, the Bruce Trail Conservancy, which the Bruce Trail runs from the Niagara region right up to the tip of the Bruce Peninsula, they say in certain points they're seeing maybe around 50% increase in visitors. So that's like in areas like around the GTA and outside of Hamilton, in the Beaver Valley, and right up on the peninsula as well.
Now, I want to bring up some photos from one of your latest adventures to illustrate sort of the impact of people heading out into the nature. I want to pull up this first photo. This is something I'm sure a lot of people probably are seeing when they're heading out to these trails, is a line of cars. Tell us about this one.
Well, this one was taken in southeast London at an area that's called Meadow Lily. There's actually two different areas that are people can access here. One is an environmentally significant area that the city owns, and then the other is a nature preserve that is owned by the Thames Talbot Land Trust. And what's really interesting here is that it looks busy. Okay, maybe that's okay for a weekend, but I took this on a Tuesday afternoon, like early in the afternoon, just a couple of weeks ago.
I want to pull up a second photo here. This photo looks like a trail covered in snow. Nothing wrong here. What are we looking at?
Okay, again, you're seeing the trail going along. You're seeing where people's footsteps have, made the trail and make it fairly clear. But if you look over a little bit off of the trail, you'll see these other footsteps where it's people that have walked off the trail for one reason or another. And with doing things like that, or your pets off the leash and running around in the forest, there's real issues with things like trampling the native plants that are there, or perhaps even spreading native species, or scaring some of the wildlife.
I want to bring up the third photo, and I got to be honest, Mary, this is something that, when I was out in the summer going on trails, this is what I was looking for. It's a sign, and it shows where the nearest washroom is. Have washrooms been an issue?
Washrooms have been an issue in certain areas for sure, because we're in the midst of a pandemic. That means that for some of these areas, they might put in porta potties, for instance, or they might have washroom facilities, but they really lack the staff or the volunteer power to be able to keep those washrooms up to the what's needed in terms of the pandemic right now. So it could mean heading out to a trail and finding that there is no washroom access, or you're going to have to walk a really long way.
I want to show some more photos. These are photos of the natural habitat here in Ontario, but I do want to ask you, why is it important to protect these species?
Well, these areas are where a lot of our native species are living. I mean, they protect all sorts of native plants. Some of the pictures that we're going to be seeing are of wild leek, wild ginger, for instance, or the picture that's up now is the American woodcock. These are the areas that protect these plants and wildlife, and they're really important because here in Ontario, and particularly in southern Ontario, we haven't got a lot of forest cover left. I think in southern Ontario, it's maybe roughly around 25% forest cover, or even less, which is not considered to be actually great percentage for supporting sustainable lifestyles.
We see the photo of the trail covered and people going off, but I have to ask, is it possible for these areas to just bounce back, as we head into spring?
Well, a lot of the conservationists are worried about what's going to happen in spring. I mean, right now there is a bit of a snowpack, but getting into spring is that's when plants are starting to germinate. So and things get pretty mucky out there on the trails. So people have more of a tendency to walk off the trail to avoid some of that. And so the concern about spreading invasive species and trampling on what's there are that much larger at that point in time. And also we have some ground nesting birds, as we saw with the American woodcock. It's a ground nesting bird. So again, there's concerns if pets are off their leash, scaring these birds at a very important time in their season.
Now, Mary, I know for your latest for TVO.org, you spoke to conservation officials. I'm sure they told you, there's some stories out there about being prepared for heading out to these terrains and parks as well.
So sure, and I've heard some anecdotal accounts that I haven't been able to verify, so I can't really talk about them. But one that I found kind of interesting happened earlier this week when a pair of hikers had to be rescued from ice that had broken off a shoreline just off of the Bruce Peninsula, and they were quite a ways into Georgian Bay. So these are some of the challenges when people aren't familiar with the terrain.
Well, let's talk about that, precautions. As we head into warmer weather here, we're teased here in southwestern Ontario and Toronto with the 5 degrees. But as we start getting into warmer weather, what should we be taking into account as we visit these green spaces?
Well, I think first off, before you head out, check with your local public health unit to see if they are recommending that you, or if they think that you're allowed or should be traveling outside of your zone, your control zone at this point. They can also offer you tips on how to socially distance when you're in the wild, because there are a lot of people on the trails. The other thing that you might want to do is to visit websites such as Ontario Parks or the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry or the Ontario Environment Conservation and Parks websites. They have lots of tips on how to leave a very light footprint when you're out there in the wild. And then when you get to the trail, just remember to stick to the trail and then also to keep your pet on the leash. And I think the biggest thing is to enjoy yourself. Everybody's really excited that people are getting in touch with nature. And it's not like these conservationists don't want people to come. They do. They just want to make sure that you stick to the trail and keep your pet on a leash.
That's very good advice. I want to thank you so much, Mary Baxter. That's Mary Baxter, our Southwestern Ontario Hub journalist.
The agenda this week considered Canada's 60-year-old fiscal equalization program, looked into the future of pipelines in this country, and asked what's needed to make the post-COVID economic recovery more equitable. The agenda's Week in Review begins hearing the range of perspectives held by Black voters on the conservative side of the political spectrum. I wanted to get in a sentence or two why you are drawn to conservatism, and I'd like to start with you, Lily.
So for me, coming from a background in Africa where people work hard, things are not handed over to you easily, there is no really safety net. So the conservative concepts really appealed to me because I knew that they really go for people who work hard. They like that. They like the fact that you need to be fiscally responsible. I like the idea that if you work hard, you can make it in this country. So those are the things, and they're very welcoming. So those are the things that really attracted me to the Conservative Party.
And Jamil, what about you?
Well, I'm motivated by, I think, 2 goals when it comes to politics. The first one is how do we fight for a more fair, just society? And then the second one is how do we protect the good things about our country that have made it possible for the current progress that we have? And I think that politics is how we can best achieve both of those goals.
And Carmen, what about you?
Well, I believe in the freedom to believe, to work, freedom of religion. And as Lily says, you work hard and you can make it.
And what about you, Frances?
I actually find being a Black conservative almost an act of activism. I think it forces many people to have challenging conversations, and I think it creates a much broader political spectrum, which I think is good for all Canadians.
And Jamil, obviously there are different kinds of Black conservatives, but throughout Canadian history, what have been the key features of Black conservatism?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that Black conservative politics is not about being a Black person who's a member of a certain party. It's a way of thinking. It's a philosophy. It's an approach to politics and activism that has many centuries of effort behind it. And I look at it as being, historically, it's about acknowledging that there are good things in our country that we want to protect and fighting to belong in that country and to make it better without dismantling the positive gains that have been made. So when we think about having appreciating mixed market capitalism, for example, or, freedom of speech and freedom of religion, these are things that Black conservatives over the years have valued and have fought to protect, but have also made the effort to challenge Canada to be better. And to me, that is what the Black conservative tradition is about.
And just to build on that, Frances, to go back on something that you just said about how you feel being a Black conservative is an act of is activism itself. Can you expand on that, please?
I look at it as an act of activism, not just in elections, but within the party. The fact of the matter is every political party has racist origins. They all started without us. And so I think we've had a big issue in being pigeonholed into one area of politics. And that means that our views are not being really fairly debated. And so this year has been actually quite amazing to see such a hunger and an interest for this perspective to come forward. And it's a very broad perspective. I think you'll notice on the panel as we talk, my opinion can be very different from that of some of the other candidates or Jamil. But one thing I've noticed is there's space for all of us here. We just have to work and make it.
I want to talk more about that diversity in a second, and we'll also talk about racism. But Lily, Canada's first ever Black MP and federal cabinet minister was a conservative, Lincoln Alexander. He was elected to the House of Commons in 1968. Why do you think it was conservatives that achieved that first in this country?
Like I said before, conservatives don't segment people by race. And they don't segment people by your income level. They accept you if you're able to deliver. So I am almost certain that at that time they were looking at this guy who could actually be able to deliver for their community and said, okay, come and be in the tent. And I think that is what the Conservative Party is about. And that's what we should be talking about all the time. In the media, trying to put some of these great things that they've done and feeling comfortable. I think that guy in 1968 felt as comfortable as I am right now in 2021.
I would argue was less comfortable, and maybe that's why he did it. I know, speaking on his history, if I looked back at some of the legislation he brought forward and talked to people who worked with him, he went through difficult experiences within the party and used that to help bring the party forward. So I think when we talk about it, we have to always remember the challenges that exist in bringing in new space for our community.
Why do you think he was able to achieve that, though, in 1968, Frances?
Because he was willing to fight. Black political engagement involves pushing into systems that weren't designed for us or by us. And so I've learned that if I want my voice to be heard, I have to ensure that I'm at the table. I can't ask, I have to create the space for myself.
One of the things about equalization that's important is it's a program. It's about moral obligation to share across territory, but it's also a very pragmatic, hard-headed program. So if the details are not working, if the program is not functioning properly, then what you have to do is change it, tinker with it, remake it. Alberta has some legitimate problems right now. It is possible to change the program that it receives to ensure that it gets more money per capita for drastic drops in revenue. It is a very good way of fixing things. Don't throw out the program, adjust the details.
Well, now you're talking about the art of the possible as opposed to the art of sharing. And to that, I'm going to the former politician among us, because Natalie, you were, of course, once upon a time a member of the Ontario legislature. And we're now talking about the realm of politics here. When the Trudeau government announced in 2018 that it was not going to renegotiate the equalization agreement, but rather freeze in place the status quo for 5 years, that made a lot of people unhappy. Do you think it was the right move to freeze the current agreement rather than renegotiate it?
Well, there's always an issue about, do you spend a lot of energy renegotiating at that time, or do you develop alternative programs? I mean, I think Mary is right. It is a program. It should be tinkered with. It should be adapted. And I think I'm part of, as many are, looking at what alternatives there could be in the future for this program. But there are others, and that's not the only program that exists to support a vision of equality among citizens in Canada. So I think it will have to be readjusted probably, but the fundamental way that I think we want to say, and the key message here is when Alberta says we want to opt out of this program, we're trying to say that's not the right way, because it is an important program for all of us and for the future of the Federation, essentially.
We should explain, I guess, Mary, that Alberta is not, it's not the taxpayers of Alberta that are actually sending money to the taxpayers of Quebec, right? That's not how it works. It's not a province-to-province transfer, right?
No, it's been a very difficult thing to clarify. Jason Kenney keeps talking about Alberta sending money, and look at the amount Quebec's getting. Actually, all federal taxpayers, they send the money to Ottawa, and Ottawa redistributes it. That charge that Alberta is sending money has been very damaging, and it's wrong.
All right, in which case, Trevor, let me get your view on this, because Jason Kenney, the Premier of Alberta, has often talked about having a referendum among Alberta citizens to see whether or not equalization should continue. Can you talk to us about the pluses and minuses of having a referendum on this issue?
Sure, and it does look like that will go ahead in October of this year. So Mary mentioned earlier in the program the stabilization program federally. This is separate from equalization, meant to support provinces that have big drops in revenue. The federal government did expand the size of that program so that it would cover more of revenue drops of provinces, but it wasn't as much as what Alberta was hoping for. And so in response, Premier Kenney here did recommit to a referendum, and I have a real hard time seeing him backing down from that commitment. So in October, Albertans will vote. I won't speculate on which way it will go, but if they vote to remove equalization from the Constitution, this doesn't really have any legal force. No. Equalization is a federal program completely at the discretion of the federal government to design and implement. It's not something that provinces have any formal role in at all. Politically, I think another angle of the referendum is that they want to, quote, force the federal government to the table in order to negotiate equalization. But there is already ongoing negotiations between the federal and provincial governments. There's a standing committee on fiscal transfers that meets roughly twice a year. And so any concerns, and there are legitimate concerns, can be raised and explored and discussed through the regular procedures that already exist. So we're already at the table. The referendum doesn't have any legal force. It's really a uniquely political tool that might serve provincial ends rather than changing anything federally.
There's no way you can take 173 billion barrels out of the ground and burn it, and we still have a safe climate. But more importantly, I think the way the world is moving is there is not going to be a market for that oil. And we need to deal with that, and we need to prepare Canadians. And frankly, the rest of the country is going to have to help out Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland as we go through this transition. Canada has a lot of experience on natural resources sort of coming and going in booms, and we need to do a lot better job this time than we did with, say, the cod or the forestry industries in BC, Ontario, Quebec. Because in this case, fossil fuels are going away within decades. They're not going to go away overnight, but we're talking an unprecedented move away from this energy source if we're going to have a stable climate for our kids. And doing that can actually create great, good new jobs, but they're going to be different jobs, and we need to help people through that transition.
Andrew, can I get you to follow up on that?
Yeah, I think one of the issues with a lot of this is we're talking about large global systems and bringing it down to talk about individual projects, or we're talking about a large resource and bringing it down to talk about individual projects. I mean, if you talk about Prime Minister Trudeau's number about 170 billion barrels, there's nothing in his statement there even that said we're going to dig every barrel out of the ground or pump every barrel out of the ground or what have you. He's saying rightly that there's no country in the world that's going to look at that resource and just turn tail and walk away. They're going to evaluate what it does for them and what the best strategy is to deal with that resource. And, to put it in context, we could produce oil sands at the rate that we're producing them today for probably a couple hundred years before we produce that many barrels of oil. So that's not the policy discussion we're having, plus or minus 170 billion barrels or plus or minus 2 trillion barrels, as some people have done. It's, it's variations around the current rate and whether we're building a few new projects or no new projects, whether we're shutting down existing ones or running the existing ones to the end of their lifespan. I think that's the kind of area where the conversation needs to take place. And it's really hard to get that conversation to a level where we're meaningfully moving the dial on global emissions. And it's not to say we shouldn't act on climate change. It's just to say that the global energy system is massive and we're burning fossil fuels, an almost mind-boggling amount of fossil fuels every day. So each individual thing necessarily looks small. That doesn't mean don't do anything about it, but it means that when you're looking at those individual decisions, you can't make one project or one resource decision or one country's policy the make or break thing for action on climate change. So what I would say, though, to Keith's point is I think he's right about the transition, but I think it comes in a different way than the way he's framed it, which is it comes earlier for a province like Alberta because the boom in Alberta wasn't one about producing oil and windfall royalty revenues. It was about producing oil sands projects. And the reason why the Alberta economy boomed, all that jobs and employment, was not just the oil money getting spent, it was the projects getting built. And so it's almost that growth rate of production that was driving the boom in Alberta, not just the production itself. And so even if, we can have an argument about how much oil the world's going to use in 2030 or not going to use, but what's important to our economy in a way and to Canada is that question of the rate of change of Canadian production. And I think that we can agree that the outlook there has changed dramatically. And so the bets people were making on new projects year after year after year, that's gone away no matter what. And it's gone away because of price, it's gone away because of climate, it's gone away because of lead times, and it's disrupting a whole set of people who actually don't necessarily live that close to where the oil is produced.
Well, we just got a few minutes left here, and I want to get both Warren and Kristen on this next question, which is, this sounds like a massive, for the ages, national project ahead of us. We've got to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. We've got to embrace renewables more. We've got to do something big about climate change. And we've got to help people in Saskatchewan and Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador to make sure that they aren't crushed as a result of this transition. Warren, how in heaven's name do we realistically do all that?
Well, the answer is that there's a lot of parts here. We need to have worker retraining. We need to be investing in the new renewable technologies. One thing that we haven't talked about is that, oil is still a resource and you can use it for things other than fuel. And one of the things that I think Canada should be looking at is, can we be using that oil for other value-added products, things that aren't contributing to the GHGs, things that are more durable? Plastics is obviously a big example. We obviously want to avoid microplastics and the problems are there. There are a lot of things that we can do, but we have a lot of smart people in this country, and I think we can make this transition. We need to develop a vision for where we want to get to.
Kristen, take the last word on this, if you would.
I agree. This is probably the great challenge of our times, the energy transition, and how we are going to get through this transition, being a country that has for the past few decades really made so much of our money off of oil and gas in particular. But one thing I would also say is that I think we're also going to see the federal government try to take more decisive and bold action on climate change.
Just to set the table for our discussion, we do have a few maps I want to get through. So Sheldon, if you could please bring in the maps. Here's a map of the city's COVID-19 cases to date. Lots of cases in the northwest part of Toronto and parts of Scarborough. A couple of hotspots in East York, downtown, and Etobicoke, and very few cases in Midtown. We have another map here, and here's a map from the 2016 census of low-income neighborhoods in Toronto. Again, we see parts of Scarborough, the Northwest, East York, and downtown with higher percentage of low-income neighborhoods. Jennifer, I wanted to ask you the first question. We do see maps of Toronto, but obviously what's happening is not just isolated to the 416, correct?
That's right. The same patterns that we've seen playing out in the city of Toronto, where lower income neighborhoods, where more people are essential workers, more people live in cramped housing, are at higher risk of COVID-19. That's a pattern that's held true across not just the province, but the country and in other parts of the world as well. So some of these patterns you're seeing where the dark shaded parts of the map are sort of aligning with where people are also more lower income and working a lot of these essential jobs where they can't stay at home. That tends to be where COVID cases have concentrated.
And Deputy Mayor, what do these maps tell us about the unequal impact of COVID-19?
Well, I think the map tells us a lot, but I think it's really important for us to understand that COVID didn't create this problem. In fact, this problem existed well before COVID, and really what it's demonstrating to us, though, that we have to act, we have to help people, and as has been stated before, the conditions of cramped housing, the conditions with respect to many of the frontline workers who are from specific areas who are, predisposed to other issues such as lack of appropriate housing, food insecurity, lack of education, and so on. And so what it tells us is that we have lots of work to do. And in fact, we have to put not only policies in place and not only relying on government to actually do everything, but it is a collaborative approach as a society that we have to take the next step in order to address this inequality. It's intolerable that these conditions have been allowed to fester, and the pandemic has definitely shown us that there is a tremendous gap that has existed in our society that really needs to be addressed, and efforts are actually being made to address those. But at the same time, while we take these necessary steps and efforts to address them, we also have to measure for impact, because if we don't measure for impact, we will never know whether or not we're being successful.
And just to build on what the Deputy Mayor said, Nakima, he said that some of the conditions that we're seeing right now existed before the pandemic. The title of tonight's program is Equity, Economic Recovery, and COVID-19. What does equity look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because equity is a word that, especially since all of the activism that we've seen over the course of the summer months, that has been tossed around a lot. But I think it's really important that we define the word. So equity for us is really about understanding that some communities have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. Those communities are reflected in geographic areas, but also ethnocultural communities. So we're focused on looking at the overrepresentation of Black communities in the number of COVID-19 cases. So when we think about responses and our economic recovery, equity means actually ensuring not just a one-size-fits-all approach, but targeted approaches that are actually going to address not just the crisis response to the disproportionalities we're seeing right now, but addressing the systemic issues, the root causes, the reasons why these disproportionalities have existed in the first place.
And Jeffrey, to build on what Nakima was saying, when we do think about recovery, one size fits all might not be what we're looking at. For the Indigenous community, how has the pandemic impacted the inequalities that the Indigenous community are experiencing in the city?
Sure, yeah. So, my fellow panelists have really hit the nail on the head with a lot of it. I think we're seeing Indigenous people in really dense urban environments where they need to go to work on overcrowded transit systems on a daily basis, and we're seeing rapid spread. But I think we also need to remember that this is not the first pandemic Indigenous people on Turtle Island have experienced, and there's a lot of intergenerational trauma about historical pandemics that have impacted communities. So alongside the historical issues that have been made more acute related to poverty and housing, we're seeing this secondary shadow pandemic related to mental health and, in some cases, substance abuse and family violence that is really becoming more acute in the face of this pandemic.
What you just said was really interesting in the sense that this is not the first pandemic that the Indigenous community has experienced. Why is that important for us to acknowledge?
I think it's important because we need to recognize that people are dealing with a lot of intergenerational trauma right now, and we need trauma-informed land-based tools and practices to be able to address the way that this pandemic is impacting Indigenous people. It also has a lot to do with vaccine hesitancy, right? Because Indigenous people have a very long history of, in fact, experimentation at the hands of settler medicine.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And that's it for this Friday, February 26, 2021. Next week, we'll look at the vaccine rollout to date, debate the future of long-term care in the province, and present another installment of the TVO Toronto Star Joint Initiative, The Democracy Agenda. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thank you for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman. And by viewers like you. Thank you.